Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give about 30 seconds to a minute or so to let people continue to log in, log on, and take care of things so that they can make it here for our wonderful speaker today. So if you just want to sit tight or grab yourself something to drink, again, it'll be about 30 seconds or so, 30 seconds to a minute here, and we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome back to those of you that have joined us before, and welcome to those of you that are new with us here today, back to our Key Issues and Promising Practices series. We are really enjoying what we're able to bring to you this year. Obviously, things have taken a turn, forcing us to go virtual, but we are making the best of it with some amazing speakers filled with just extreme expertise, knowledge, and experience. Today is a perfect example of that. We have Jessica Gidagaakoons Smith from the Sovereign Bodies Institute, and she is going to share with us not only her own personal experience, which is a very powerful one, but also tremendous knowledge, research she has found from her studies. She's doing some wonderful research and continuing her education to help Native American women, children, and men along the way. So I'm excited to bring her story and her experience with you today. A couple other things here before we move on. Next series we have is Victoria Yabans with Red Wind Consulting. She is sharing a presentation called Housing First, and it's a model for transitional housing. So I hope that you join us for that. If you haven't registered, you can go ahead and do that at Mending the Sacred Hoop, our website, the OVW Travel Events tab, and you can register there. Also, keep an eye out for our newsletters that'll continue to roll in your inbox with new speakers coming to us through our Key Issues and Promising Practices series. Again, I'm so excited to have you all here today. A couple of things just to mention, housekeeping items. This is Zoom webinar, so it's not Zoom meeting. And because of that, we have to have a video and audio shut off. However, if you do want to share, if you have a question or a comment and you want to speak it, just use your raise hand function and I will go ahead and unmute you. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A function. If you have a question specifically for Jessica, we can make sure she gets that. If she doesn't see it, either I or my colleague Holly can make sure that she gets your question and gets it answered. If you do have any technical issues, please feel free to either chat Holly in the chat here on Zoom, or you can email her, and her email is listed there at hoden@mshoop.org. So again, I'm so excited to introduce you to Jessica Gidagaakoons. I'm going to say it wrong, and I hope she corrects me because I'm horrible at this. I need to practice much more on that beautiful name. Anyways, I'm going to surprise her with a visioning experience that I do also hope the rest of you try on if you're willing, and you can just chat your thoughts and throw them in the chat box there if you want to share, and you certainly don't have to. But for today's visioning experience, and again, this is mostly for Jessica, so I can shake her a little bit before she jumps into her presentation. Jessica, if you were any type of landscape today, what would that be? So landscape. So the way I like to do these visioning experiences is just closing my eyes, going deep inside and feeling into my body, into the elements around me, and thinking, what type of landscape am I today? And for me, right away, it comes, I am a jagged mountain peak. So pointy and full of edges, maybe some mountain snow on there as well. So I could analyze that one for a while, I suppose. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica and allow her to share her visioning and what kind of landscape she is. Welcome, Jessica.
Which Gidagaakoons is how you pronounce it. Envisioning myself as a landscape, I would be probably the rocks along the river. Just because I'm a water protector and water is life. So to me, being within the water and among it would be really powerful and meaningful to me as a person.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I hope it wasn't too difficult. It's meant to be fun.
No, as soon as you said that, I knew what I was going to say.
Yay! Wonderful. All right, Jessica, I will be quiet now. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to light a smudge here. Bonjour, Gidagaakoons Indigenous. My name is Jessica Gidagaakoons Smith. I am a Two-Spirit member of the Boys Fort Band of Minnesota Chippewa tribe. I am a student, a legal studies, First Nation studies student at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. And soon to be in the fall, I'm going to be a grad student at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I'm a McNair Scholar. I am the Newman Civic Fellow for the University of Wisconsin-Superior. And I have received numerous awards, Justice Service Awards. I just received a Young Advocate Award and the McNair Research Excellence Award. For my work that I do in all of these systems and justice system, different advocacy centers, and then the research that I do on my own. I am a research assistant for Sovereign Bodies Institute, but this presentation and this work is not reflective of the work that I do with them. I do amazing work with them. Sovereign Bodies Institute is the most amazing institute that provides services for families of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And we are doing amazing research, different projects, but this particular presentation is not reflective of the research that I do with them. This is my own research. I have my own research page, Gidagaakoonsresearch.com. And I just wanted to make that clear that, these statistics, or there's a couple of slides where you'll see statistics, those are coming from the research that I have done on my own and not with Sovereign Bodies. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yep, okay. You are good to go.
All right, cool. So the title of this is Walking Alongside Two-Spirit Survivors of Violence and Trafficking, a Personal Healing Journey. I just want to make note that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and a lot of the things that I talk about and advocate for really have a lot to do with mental health and how systems really do not provide the cultural and medicine for not even just Two-Spirit survivors, but all survivors of violence and trafficking within all different types of systems. So that is something that within my research in my advocacy that I am aiming to change, to sort of decolonize these systems of oppression. Historical and multi-generational trauma, a lot of people don't realize that it's something that still really affects Indigenous communities and families today. And families, it's a constant cycle of trauma and violence that really was brought upon us by colonialism. And it's something that still is a cycle within families because of alcoholism and drug abuse and all of those things that have debilitated families and really broken apart families that still causes Native children to be removed from their homes at higher rates than any other race. The effects of boarding schools, I think that people have a lot of misconceptions about, and they think that boarding schools happened so long ago that it doesn't affect us anymore, and we shouldn't have to still be carrying that trauma, which is entirely untrue. The effects of boarding schools still affect us today with that historical and multi-generational trauma. And boarding schools didn't even, my dad was in a boarding school. And so people think it happened so long ago when really the last boarding school closed in the 70s. And my dad, who's now passed away, he was in boarding school and he never really talked about it. I asked my auntie, who is still alive, who also was in that same boarding school, if she would be willing to talk with me about it. And she said no, that it was too painful. And just that alone told me everything that I needed to know. Because it just reiterated the fact that all of the research that I've done on boarding schools and all of the horrible things that I've found that children had to go through in those, by my auntie saying that it's too painful to talk about, it just gave me everything I needed to know. And I understand that my dad's pain and my dad's suffering really came from having to go through all of those horrible things in his childhood. So this is a picture of the Carlisle boarding school. And if you look at it and you just think about it, all of these children had their own families, had their own traditions, had their own ceremonial ways of just being. And when the US government took all of these children away from their families and forced them into this boarding school, this is just one of hundreds of boarding schools. What this is trafficking by the US government. And because they were forcibly removed from their homes and forced to go hundreds of miles away where they were not only emotionally, but physically, sexually abused. This is human trafficking by the US government. And a lot of people do not think of it like that, but unless, you have that lens, like I have that trafficking lens because I'm a survivor of human trafficking. So I'm constantly looking at different scenarios and different things that happened through that lens. And the same thing with the two-spirit lens. I am a two-spirit person, and to think about all of these children who are pictured here, if you think about it, how many of them were two-spirit and how many of them were stripped of their culture and of their sacredness and forced to be assimilated into the white culture or the white Catholic way of things. There were 200 children who died at Carlisle boarding school alone. Over 6,000 children in different boarding schools across the country were killed while in boarding school. So oftentimes I think about how many of these children were LGBTQ? How many of these children were Two-Spirit? How many of these children would have gone on to be amazing people within all of these systems that I'm currently working with trying to decolonize? How many of these children would have gone on to be sacred Two-Spirit leaders of their tribes? But because of this era and because of boarding schools, Two-Spirit people were pretty much erased. They were held to a sacred standard within their tribes that they were so sacred when colonists came here and all of this started happening. Tribes hid their Two-Spirit people. They hid them to protect them. And now, because of colonialism, we as Two-Spirit people are still fighting back to have our voices be heard and to bring back the visibility of our sacredness, because that is something that was taken away from us by colonization. And it's something that I actively fight for, and especially for our Two-Spirit youth, so that they know that they are sacred and they know that there is nothing to be ashamed of for being Two-Spirit. A lot of tribes do not even recognize Two-Spirit people still in their communities. I think out of the 570 some federally recognized tribes, only 32, I think 32, 35, recognize same-sex marriage. And that is something that is really extremely colonial, and our tribes and our reservations really need to be working to change that, because the federal government does not have control over those types of things for you as a tribe. So if your tribe is not recognizing same-sex marriage, please change that, because Two-Spirit people are highly sacred and we need to be held to that sacred regard if our people are going to heal. Nij Maniduweg is Two-Spirit in Ojibwe. It's a direct term, that's kind of an umbrella term, Two-Spirit, within the LGBTQ acronyms. But Two-Spirit people, sometimes there are misconceptions where people think that being Two-Spirit is a sexual identity, when it's not. It's a spiritual identity, and it's really having a feminine and a masculine spirit within you. So spiritually, you can do things that women and men have both done traditionally within their tribes. When a person is given the gift of being Two-Spirit, it means that the individual has the ability to see the world through two different perspectives at the same time. So, like I said, it's not a sexual identity, it's a spiritual identity, and that's a really common misconception. And that's also something that I work to bring visibility to, and to make people understand that being Two-Spirit does not mean you're trans, even though there are trans people who are Two-Spirit. There are people who are Two-Spirit who are gay. There are Two-Spirit people who are straight. So it's really just a spiritual identity. For myself, when my dad died, I took on the firekeeper role for his fire. And I was the only person who sat by his fire for 4 days and kept that fire going. I did not have any help. I pretty much slept next to the fire. And being a fire keeper typically now, because of colonization, is only for men. Only men are supposed to be fire keepers. But when my dad died, my spirit told me that I was to keep that fire, and it was only supposed to be me who was keeping his fire. So ever since then, I have really been keeping my spirits, and holding myself to that spiritual sacred level. And still, people know within the community that I am a fire keeper, but because of the misconceptions and the things that people think only men can be fire keepers, it's not very often that people ask me to be a fire keeper for their loved one. And that is something that really hurts my spirit. But hopefully down the line, when people start realizing within tribes that two-spirit people are sacred, that will change, and I can start doing that for my community. Because it's all too often that I see people, even on like Facebook, when somebody passes away, looking for men to be a fire keeper. That needs to change. Two-spirit people were treated with the utmost respect and honor before colonization. And I had just already said this too, but if you're here and you're from, you hear it from your tribe, or, you have people within your tribe who don't accept two-spirit people, please open up your heart to decolonizing and bringing back that sacredness to two-spirit people, especially two-spirit youth. Because a lot of cultures, and even within the Ojibwe language, we're losing our elders, and we're losing our language speakers. So it's really important to value two-spirit youth and to lift them up and let them know and let them understand that you understand that they are sacred and that they are valued and that they will be leaders in the community. Because if a two-spirit youth doesn't feel that, if a two-spirit youth doesn't feel valued, their mental health is going to be bad. They're going to be lashing out. And then that's when they get taken into either the foster care system or to the criminal justice system, where they're criminalized at higher rates than any other race. It's gonna light my smudge again. So I have a really long history of trauma, multi-generational trauma, that really stems a lot from my dad's being in a boarding school, and then myself being I was in a Catholic school when I was K through 6th grade. And even though that technically wasn't a boarding school, as Native children, me and my sisters were still treated poorly. We were still abused I remember a time where I was yanked out of the classroom by my ear just because I was caught counting on my fingers underneath the desk. So that never happened to any of the white children. It was only the Native children that were treated that way. Once I got out of 6th grade and got into grade school and high school and all that, I still went through a lot of abuse. I was sexually assaulted and raped at the age of 15. And then again at the age of 16. And those couple of years were really, really rough for me. I was drinking, I was smoking, you know, I was lashing out. And I dropped out of school when I was 15 because I was constantly getting put in school suspension, and then I dropped out. But then I went back to school at Fond du Lac Ojibwe school, and I did really well there. Even though I dropped out of school for half a year, I did like a bunch of work packets and extra work, and I was able to graduate and finish my studies early. So from then I went down to Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, where I got my AS and my AA and my AS. I got my law enforcement degree from Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. But after I graduated from Fond du Lac, my life really took a turn for the worse. And my dad died, which really put me in a bad spot. I was drinking really heavily, and I didn't know how to cope with that. I still have a problem coping with grief. And it's always been the thing that has debilitated me the most. And after that happened, I had a stepfather who had abused my daughter, and that to me was really the tipping point, I guess. After that happened, my mental health was the worst it had ever been. And that made me extremely vulnerable. So I started talking to this man on Facebook, and I was talking to him probably for close to 9 months, which I was under the impression at that time that we had a romantic relationship, and you know that he was making all these promises that if I came to him that you know he could make all of these things that I was struggling with better, that he could make me happy, all of this, you know, all of these lies that really are what we call now is grooming. And so I went there. My daughter went with her father, and I went there, and immediately when I got there, I knew right away that it was not what I was told it was. There was a lot of abuse and control, and I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations because I did not want to listen to my trafficker. I remember one time when he sent me out, and overdrank, and I remember waking up on the stairwell of the Bellagio Hotel with only my phone, and I had no idea where I was. I'm in some random stairwell. Like, I did not know where I was. But I made it out of there. And then I had no way back to where I was being held. So it took me almost a full day to make it back there. I didn't know how to take buses. I didn't know my way around there. But when I did get back, I was severely abused and held in a room for 5 days in 115 degrees outside, 130 degrees inside with no air conditioning, and no, my phone was taken away. I had my head smashed into a wall so many times in that period that after I couldn't even open my mouth, my jaw. I still have a scar on my upper lip from that. And it's a constant reminder that that was when my voice was silenced. So when I went back to school and started, I had a 10-year break out of school. And I had really no idea if I was even going to be able to do it. But I signed up for school at UWS, and 2 weeks before I was supposed to start school at UWS, my mom had a really bad accident, and she had to have emergency brain surgery because she had a brain bleed, and she broke her back, and she almost didn't make it through that. And now she has a TBI, and so I still made the decision to go back to school, even though I had to uproot from where I was living in Superior, Wisconsin, to go live with my mom so that I could care for her, because she was in really bad shape. She didn't, have any really ability to care for herself at that time. So me and my daughter moved with her in her little tiny apartment. And the first semester that I went back to school, I had my original classes, my original minor, and then I had to switch things up because it didn't work out with being able to stay at home long enough to care for my mom and then be able to be at school only a couple of days a week. So what I did was I took on an independent study. And I did that independent study, and my mentor asked me, pick a topic that works exactly, or, that correlates with your major and then with your minor. And legal studies, First Nation studies, right away, I knew I wanted to pick, missing and murdered Indigenous people, women. Throughout that first independent study, I really learned a lot about myself. And I was still not completely open about all of the things that happened to me. And, domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, all of those things that happened to me directly correlated with missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it wasn't until I went to the January Trafficking Awareness Month press conference in Duluth, Minnesota, that I sat in the back of that room and I listened to Pete Stauber speak and listened to him talk about how much he cared about Indigenous women and how much he cared about the issue of trafficking. And I got something, my inner warrior inside of me at that time was like, hey, you got to get up and say something. Like this, he's lying. And so I got up on that stage in front of 100+ people and all the press in Duluth, and I told my trafficking story. And then I turned around and looked at Pete Stauber and asked him when he was going to start supporting Savannah's Act, because he wasn't. So I put him on the spot, and at that time, that's when I came out as a trafficking survivor. And ever since then, ever since I started living my truth and speaking out against it, and even doing further research that I'll talk about in the next couple of slides, but that's what it took for me to be able to find my voice again, was to have my inner warrior challenged because of this man who was up on that stage lying straight into the faces of 100+ people. And still, even today, like I send him emails all the time. I'm constantly reaching out, trying to get him to care about the people in Minnesota, get him to care about trafficking, and he doesn't. How are we on time? Okay. So I use the term invisible with an invisible population because Indigenous people are already invisible in many systems in the data. You know, a lot of law enforcement agencies and databases don't even have categories for Native people. They don't keep track of missing Native people. They don't keep track of Native women who are missing or who are being trafficked. So being two-spirit makes you doubly invisible, because as two-spirit people are invisible often to their own tribes and people. So we are extremely invisible within these systems and these databases. And the work that I do is to remove that invisibility and to let people know that we are here. Our voices and our experiences are valid, and our stories need to be heard, and our traumas need to be understood. This is a statistic that came from my first research report that I did with the McNair Scholar Program. And that is titled The Survivor's View on Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, a healing journey of raising grassroots and survivor voices. And this is a report that really opened up a lot of doors for me, because the statistics in it and the recommendations within it is almost immediately after I started presenting on this research, and after I put this out, I had people contacting me wanting to do trainings. I did a training on how people can be more culturally supportive to LGBTQ and two-spirit people within the Judicial Council of California. So, you know, I'm a student, I'm a legal studies student and a survivor, training judges and lawyers. Because within this report, I found that there's a severe underreporting of violence against Indigenous people. With the people that I surveyed, only less than 50% reported violent crimes against them, because only 6% of them feel safe in the justice system. I asked them if they were to report a violent crime against them, would they feel safe in the justice system? And they said no. So that's why they don't report it. People are not going to report to an agency that they do not feel safe with, or to an agency that they feel are going to re-victimize them, which we see time and time and time again with the people that do report, that are constantly being re-victimized by the system and by the policies that do not protect survivors at all. So this is from a little bit of kind of what I did with the judicial system, but courtroom practices for, you know, LGBTQ or Native youth specifically. Things like allowing a victim to smudge prior to a proceeding or hold a prayer tie. You know, I hold these prayer ties every time I do a presentation just because this little prayer tie brings a lot of strength. Make gender neutral bathrooms in all buildings. Believe survivors, because if you're badgering survivors, they go into what we call survival mode, and we're very closed off. And so if we don't feel safe by you, or if we're feeling like you're attacking us in any way, survivors gonna shut down, and they're not gonna talk, they're not gonna speak. And when they do, if they're testifying, you know, they can have memory loss, because that's what trauma does to your brain. So if you're not properly supporting them culturally so that they feel strong enough and that they feel safe, their testimony and anything that they say is likely not going to be accurate because of that memory loss that trauma gives you. Even something as small as an LGBTQ two-spirit sticker can make people feel visible and protected. It's little things like that. And, you know, checking your internal biases that you may or may not have. You know, not everybody has them, but some people do. And it's really important to check those and make sure that when you're working with somebody, or that you have somebody, whether you're advocating for them or whether you're there as a judge, lawyer, police officer, whatever have you, you need to make sure that the person that you are representing, or the person that you are with, feels that you honor them and that you respect them. So this is for lawyers, and even could be, you know, victim advocates, but having an initial like 1 hour trauma informed session prior to any court hearing to get to know your client and get to know their traumas and understand where they're coming from. Because like I said in the prior slide, if you don't understand that, and if you don't understand their traumas, they're going to close off. They're not going to talk about it, and then that's when they go into survival mode. So get to know them, how you can best advocate for them by requesting culturally based services. Small things like just having a cedar stick smudge stick, which is so easy to make. You know, you just go to a cedar tree and put tobacco down before you take any cedar, but then you just bundle it up. Or just make these little tobacco ties. You just get a little piece of fabric and put some tobacco in it for that youth or for that person to hold in their hand. And the sad thing is that tobacco ties and prayer ties have been weaponized now within the Line 3 protests and things like that. I have a report that I just put out about the correlations between trafficking, extractive industries, and the shipping industries. And I had a water protector say that all they had was a prayer tie in their hand, and they were surrounded by police officers demanding them to drop their weapons. And the only weapon that they had was a prayer tie. So it's really important to honor Indigenous medicines in all systems, because our medicines bring us strength, and you can't help somebody through anything if they don't have that strength. And I have a youth who was in a facility who did not allow her to smudge, and she didn't want to be there because of it. So it can be a real make or break thing with people, and especially with youth, because if they grow up with that, if they have that, if that's all they know, and then they're taken away and put into a facility or into a foster care system where those values and those traditions are not made available to them, their mental health is going to decrease, and they're going to get lost in the system. So a little bit more on foster care and residential treatments, like I was just talking about, making spaces for children to use these medicines. You know, I've heard the excuse that it's a fire hazard or whatever have you. No, it's not. That's a real colonial excuse. It's not a fire hazard. I smudge every single day in my house. Every single day I smudge. You know, and then finding funding for Native children to have access to traditional art supplies, beading kits, dream catcher making supplies, ribbon skirt making supplies, things like that especially in residential treatment centers, can really, really improve the mental health of that youth and that child that has been taken away from their home. If you give them a little piece of their home and allow them to be who they are at home, then their experience there, and whether they're there for drug treatment or mental health treatment, it's going to be 1,000 times better if they are able to be who they truly are. Native children are criminalized in the foster care system. They need cultural treatment and guidance, and we need to stop the foster care to prison pipeline. I have done research even within my first research project and my second one, and continued research, that Native children are not taken care of in the foster care system. When a child goes missing in the foster care system, nobody looks for them. When the child gets put into the foster care system, a lot of tribes just give up on them. They disenroll them. And that is erasure of that child's not only culture, but that child's identity as well, especially if these children are two-spirit children, because they're going to get put into this system where their spirituality and their two-spirit identity is not seen or valued at all. And then we wonder why they run away from the foster care system. We wonder why they run away from these residential treatments. Because they're not being honored and seen, and they don't feel safe there. So it's these little things that are so small, but can make such a huge impact on a child's life. Native youth already find it hard to identify with other youth. You know, there's no sense of belonging, no access to cultural activities. These are all barriers for these youth, which can be easily removed, very easily removed. So I don't understand why there still are so many residential facilities, so many foster care workers or social workers who are not encouraging this, who are not fighting for this, for those youth. You go into a career path to help children. And we're giving you tools. As a two-spirit survivor of violence, you know, I'm giving you tools and ways to protect and to honor two-spirit Native youth. But I'm still seeing a lack of it. We need to do better. All of these things can be made to improve foster care experience for Native youth. I think the most important is to increase access to male advocates and positive role models in the system. Having gatherings, allowing Native children to go to ceremony, to go to powwows, to go to, you know, even if it's just a support group for two-spirit youth. Whatever that youth feels is gonna make them stronger, is gonna help them. As advocates and as social workers, it's your job to protect those youth. And especially removing the stigma around commercially sexually exploited youth. I have people who work with sexually exploited youth directly, and these children are not getting any support services for their spiritual needs. And as a survivor of human trafficking, to imagine not having access to my traditional medicines, it's debilitating to think about. If I didn't have my traditional medicines, I would not be able to have the strength to speak about these things. I would not be able to have the strength to be able to talk about my traumas. So it's really important to have access to all of these things for these children. My heart completely breaks for children who don't have access to traditional medicines in these systems. Because to me, that shows that these systems don't care about them at all. All of these systems care about is the money. Be inclusive to your services to all genders and two-spirit people. Listen to survivors. Listen to two-spirit people. Listen to children. We are sacred and we must be treated that way. Dear survivors, dear two-spirit relatives, dear children, you are strong, you are beautiful, you are sacred, you are resilient, and you are loved. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It was, again, very moving and powerful. And hearing you speak today, you are so strong. You said, you wouldn't be able to do it without your medicines, and I completely appreciate that. But from where I stand and where I sit, you are a very powerful and strong woman, and I'm just so glad that we have you a part of the community, a part of the work, helping move it forward. You're a force to be reckoned with, girl. I have a lot of wonderful things that I want to say from my own standpoint, but I'm going to open it up. I'm going to pause myself, open it up to those of you, if you have any questions specifically for Jessica while we still have her here on the webinar. Now's a chance for you to do that. Again, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you, or you can also type into the chat or the question, actually, sorry, the Q&A, so that we can ask those questions directly to Jessica. As questions roll in, if they do, one of the things, Jessica, that I just loved that you shared at the very beginning, along with your personal story, which was so powerful, and I've heard it before, and still I get goosebumps every time I hear it, is your explanation and your information and knowledge about the two-spirit identity. And I love that you made that distinction between a spiritual identity and a gender identity, because I think that is something that is very, people just can't grasp that. And so for that piece to be uncovered and for you to express it that way, it was really helpful and effective, just from my own experience. And so now as I move forward talking about it, describing it as more of a spiritual identity so that people can really anchor into that was something I appreciated.
Miigwech.
Yeah. And then the other thing, again, people, please feel free to ask questions, but I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, but the systems that are set up in our country are faulty in so many ways and heartbreaking in so many ways. And so, as you mentioned, not only did you address and bring up those issues and how hurtful they are to survivors, how hurtful they are to Native American peoples in general, they're just not set up. But what I loved about what you did today, Jessica, is you gave us things, you gave us actual tools to help us bring forward and say, like, look, this is all you need, systems workers. Create a bundle of cedarwood, or not, sorry, cedarwood, but cedar. I carry cedarwood oils. It's one of my favorite things. So that's why I got off there. But it's so simple and helpful. And seeing somebody with a bundle of sage just on their desk, when I was a teacher, that's what I would have. I'd have my crystals, my rocks, I had my cedar, I had my sage on my desk, and it would cause students to ask me questions. So not only is it helpful for those that use it as medicines, but it's also a way to open up a communication, right? So for systems workers to have those things, it's an easy way to, palm open, welcome people in. So again, you had so much information in there, but those are some of the few things that I just wanted to mention. And for those of you, again, attending today, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar along with a survey asking for your feedback after the webinar is finished. So if there's any other thoughts, we have a couple minutes left. Please feel free. Jessica, is there anything else you'd like to say before we bid you adieu?
I don't think so. I'm gonna drop my link to my website in the I can get in the chat, just because of the research that I talked about, in case anybody's interested in reading the full reports.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Can find it. Here we go. Yes, one more thing I do want to say too. Even though it is the end of the legislative session, I had done my recent report features Mary Kunesh Podi, or Mary Kunesh, who is a Minnesota senator, and on the Minnesota Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. Everybody within that report is on that task force and did that work. But it's really important to be reaching out to senators, especially Senator Limmer, who really shut down the mandate within the task force report to create a office for MMIW in Minnesota to ensure that the mandates are being followed through. So to me, that shows that our government does not care about us. They don't think that it's worth, money to be put into ensuring the safety of Native women, youth, men, and that needs to be addressed. And anybody who can speak out against that, please do, because this office for MMIW is really important for Minnesota. Minnesota ranks 9th in the country for MMIW, and the office is really needed here to ensure that all of the mandates are followed. And yeah, I just wanted to wrap that up to make sure that people, don't be afraid to use your voice. I had just recently, there was a Supreme Court that overturned somebody's rape conviction because she willingly drank. And what I did when I found that out is I put a call out to survivors, and I gathered a bunch of survivor stories and put them all together in a document, a PDF document, and sent it to that Senator Limmer, who was in charge of moving that forward. And shortly after I sent that to him, he sent me an email back saying, thank you for this, this amendment will be getting passed. So that's what it takes. It takes speaking out. It takes finding those survivors, whether you're a survivor or not, or you're working with survivors, even if they're anonymously saying, speaking about their experiences. That is what it takes to create change specifically in the government system, is these, I don't say old white men, but they need to be able to kind of feel the pain in a way. And that's what I did with that report, or not even a report, it was just a document of survivor stories. But that changed that whole legislation so that people no longer have to be worried that if they intentionally drink, or if they're intentionally getting, under the influence, that they can legally be raped. That's nonsense. So thankfully that was changed. Now,
thank you for that. So you're suggesting that people call specifically the Senator Limmer to talk about the MMIW office actually following through with it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that is a wonderful call to action. Thank you for that. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. Again, it's so great to see your face, and I hope to continue to see you around the Duluth area. And thank you to all of those folks who joined us today. I hope you guys all, got your heads filled with more information as I did. It's been so wonderful. Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech.